61 years. That's how long it took a police department in upstate New York to finally put a name to one of the most haunting murders in their history. A little girl walked out of her mother's front door one Sunday evening in 1964 and never came home. What happened next and how investigators finally solved it 6 decades later is one of the most remarkable cold case breakthroughs of our time. This is the story of Mary Teresa Simpson.
This is a historic day for the Elmira Police Department, justice after almost 62 years. On Sunday, March 15th, 1964, at approximately 10:50 p.m., 12-year-old Mary Teresa Simpson was reported missing by her father.
On the evening of Sunday, March 15, 1964, a 12-year-old girl left her mother's apartment on the east side of Elmira, New York, and began walking home. The route was short, a handful of residential blocks through a quiet neighborhood she had known most of her life. She never reached her destination. By late that night, her father had called everyone he could think of. Nobody had seen her. Elmira police were notified, and an official missing persons report was filed before midnight. Mary Teresa Simpson was 12 years old. Her parents, Ellsworth and Rose, had separated about a year earlier, and she had been living with her father. The two of them had only moved back to Elmira 2 weeks before her death, a return to familiar streets, familiar faces. That Sunday, she left her father's apartment around 3 in the afternoon, telling him she was going to visit a cousin. Instead, she went to see her mother. Rose hadn't known she was coming, but she was glad. The afternoon stretched on. Mother and daughter caught up after months of limited contact. Around 6:30 that evening, Mary Teresa said goodbye and headed back toward her father's apartment on foot.
She never arrived. Ellsworth waited through the evening. When the hours passed and she still hadn't walked through the door, he began calling everyone he knew, Rose first, then relatives, then anyone who might have crossed paths with his daughter. Nobody had seen her after she left her mother's door. Nobody remembered a girl walking alone on those streets that evening. Elmira, in 1964, was a river city of roughly 40,000 people, built along the Chemung River and spreading outward through neighborhoods of wood frame houses and quiet residential blocks. The East Side was the kind of place where most people knew their neighbors. Mary Teresa had grown up in this part of the city before her parents separated. March evenings in upstate New York come fast. By 6:30, the last light was already gone from the sky. The sidewalks were nearly empty, most families already inside and settled for the night. A 12-year-old girl walking alone in the fading dark of a Sunday evening. Somewhere between her mother's door and her father's apartment, someone crossed her path. For 4 days, police and volunteers combed every block of Elmira's East Side. Officers knocked on doors and questioned anyone who had been outside that Sunday evening. Basements, garages, and back lots were checked. Volunteers spread along both banks of the Chemung River and fanned out into the parks and empty fields on the edge of the city. Search parties worked the wooded hillsides and logging roads on Elmira's southern and western outskirts. Hilly, heavily forested terrain still patched with snow and ice from the winter. Ellsworth waited at home beside the telephone. Rose waited. Linda, Mary Teresa's 16-year-old sister, waited alongside them. On the 4th day, Thursday, March 19th, a man hiking through the woods with his 2 young sons came across something on a wooded hillside off Combs Hill Road, roughly 5 miles southwest of downtown Elmira. He had found her. Mary Teresa's body had been hidden beneath heavy stones, broken tree branches, and layers of earth and leaves. The sheer volume of material piled on top of her told investigators something about the killer. He had not acted in a panic. He had taken his time. He had worked methodically to conceal what he had done. The county medical examiner conducted an autopsy. The findings were devastating. Mary Teresa had been sexually assaulted. She had been suffocated and strangled. Soil and debris had been forced into her mouth. Someone had taken her off a residential street, driven her out of the city and left her on a remote hillside above the town where she had grown up. With the discovery of her body, the Elmira Police Department shifted from a missing persons search to a full homicide investigation. Detectives moved fast. They interviewed men who had been in the area on the evening of March 15th, anyone seen near the roads leading to the hillside, anyone with prior offenses involving children. Criminal records were pulled at the local, state, and federal level. Every known offender in Chemung County and the surrounding region was checked. Tips flooded in from across the area. Each one was logged, documented, cross-referenced against the known facts, and either pursued or eliminated. Detectives worked the case around the clock for months. By October of 1964, 7 months after the murder, Elmira detectives had formally questioned more than 300 people in connection with the case. It was unlike anything the department had ever undertaken. And yet, none of it produced a viable suspect. None of it produced a meaningful lead. The local radio station and the city's newspaper pooled resources to raise a $1,000 reward for information leading to the killer's identity. Residents who had never met Mary Teresa donated to the fund. The murder had shaken Elmira in a way that nothing had in living memory. By 1972, the reward had been raised to $5,000. Over the next 6 decades, not a single person ever collected it. If you're watching Cold Case Evidence for the first time, subscribe and hit the bell. We cover cases just like this one every week. The case generated thousands of pages of documentation, interviews, tips, witness statements, and follow-up reports, all filed and cataloged. The material filled multiple cabinets in the department's records room. As years became decades, detectives retired and new investigators inherited the file. Each new set of eyes read through the same stacks of reports, searching for a name or a connection that someone before them had missed. Every review reached the same conclusion. The file remained open, but every actionable lead had gone cold decades ago. The murder of Mary Teresa Simpson was the most well-known unsolved case in the history of the Elmira Police Department. Every detective who came through those doors knew about it. 61 years of institutional memory passed from one generation of officers to the next. The file outlasted them all. The killer's name was not in it. He had no connection to Mary Teresa, to her family, or to anyone in her circle. He had never been questioned. He had never been fingerprinted. Decades of investigation, and not once had his name appeared on a single page of that file. The person who carried the weight of this case the longest was not a detective. Linda Simpson was 4 years older than her sister. She was 16 in March of 1964. She had barely had time to reconnect with Mary Teresa after months apart. Her sister had only been back in Elmira for 2 weeks before she was killed. Linda watched the investigation unfold. She watched it stall. She watched the detectives move on and the newspaper coverage fade. She watched the reward money sit unclaimed year after year. And she never stopped asking. As the years turned into decades, Linda watched her parents age and die without ever hearing the name of the man who had taken their youngest daughter. Ellsworth went first. Rose followed years later. Neither of them lived to see justice. "It affected me really badly," Linda said years later. "I lived through it for years and cried and suffered heartache all this time. Like I told everybody, I did this for my mom." Mary Teresa had been the youngest of 4 children. She was a kid who had already been through a hard year, the separation, the move away, the move back. Everyone who remembered her described someone easy to be around. Linda kept her sister's memory alive when everyone else moved on. She called the Elmira Police Department periodically, sometimes once a year, sometimes more, to ask whether there was anything new. The answer was always the same, but she kept calling anyway.
In the year 2000, 36 years after the murder, Mary Teresa's clothing was submitted to the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. The items had been collected at autopsy in 1964 and held in evidence storage ever since. The technology to analyze biological material at this level had simply not existed when the crime was committed. Analysts examined the blouse first. They found biological material and extracted a clear male DNA profile from it, clear enough to be used for comparison if a suspect could ever be identified. The profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's national database of genetic profiles from convicted offenders, automatically compared against unsolved cases across the country. It came back empty. The unknown male was not in the system. 3 years later, in 2003, additional clothing was sent to the lab. Analysis of the skirt and underwear recovered more biological material and confirmed the original profile while strengthening it with additional genetic data. But without a match in CODIS or any other law enforcement database in the country, the identity of the man who had left that DNA behind in 1964 remained unknown. Here is what no one knew at the time. The man who left that DNA on Mary Teresa's clothing in 1964 was dead for a year when the 2003 testing confirmed his profile. He was buried in an Elmira cemetery less than 5 miles from the wooded hillside where he had left her body 4 decades earlier. His DNA had never been collected during his lifetime. He had never been a suspect. No one had ever had any reason to ask for it. The case needed a different path. In 2022, the Elmira Police Department applied for and received a grant from Season of Justice, a nonprofit organization that funds advanced forensic testing for cold case investigations. The grant covered the full cost of submitting the DNA evidence to a private laboratory. The material was sent to Astrea Forensics, a private genetics laboratory based in the Woodlands, Texas, that specializes in recovering usable genetic data from severely degraded samples. The clothing from the Simpson case was nearly 60 years old at that point, stored under varying conditions since 1964. It was among the oldest material Astrea had ever processed. Using a method called forensic-grade genome sequencing, the lab scientists extracted every fragment of genetic information remaining in the degraded material. From samples more than half a century old, they built a complete, usable DNA profile of the unknown male. That profile was uploaded to public genealogy databases where millions of Americans have voluntarily submitted their own genetic information. The FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team began searching for relatives of the unknown person among those public submissions. In 2023, investigators also partnered with the Criminal Investigation Resource Center at Russell Sage College, where criminologist and associate professor Dr. Christina Lane and her students contributed to the genealogical research, tracing family lines and cross-referencing public records with genetic data. The work was painstaking. The crime was from 1964. The suspect's family tree stretched back generations into upstate New York and beyond. Many relatives had been born in the early 20th century. Birth records from that era were incomplete. Marriage records had gaps. Some branches of the tree were nearly impossible to follow. Individuals who had moved, changed names, or simply left no paper trail. The genealogists worked outward from every genetic match in the databases, methodically building and narrowing the family tree generation by generation, branch by branch. By 2025, after more than 2 years of coordinated genealogical research between the FBI team and the Russell Sage researchers, the work had narrowed to a single individual. He had lived in Elmira in 1964.
He was 32 years old at the time of the murder. He was a truck driver, a Korean War veteran, a married man with children. He had spent his entire life in the same city where the crime took place, and he had been dead since March of 2004. Investigators approached the man's surviving son and requested a voluntary DNA sample. The son agreed. The comparison confirmed a clear parent-child genetic relationship between the son and the unknown male profile recovered from Mary Teresa's clothing decades earlier. A familial match narrows the search to a family line. It does not identify a specific individual within that line. Investigators needed more. They obtained legal authorization to exhume the suspect's body from the Elmira cemetery where he had been buried for more than 20 years. The remains were carefully recovered, documented, and transported to the State Forensic Laboratory. DNA extracted directly from the exhumed remains was compared against the male profile that had been developed from Mary Teresa's clothing in 2000 and confirmed in 2003. The match was definitive. The probability of selecting any unrelated individual who would produce the same genetic result was less than 1 in 320 billion. After 61 years, the unknown male finally had a name.
His name was Alfred Raymond Murray, Jr. Born in 1931, Murray grew up in Elmira and never left. He served in the United States Army during the Korean War and returned home to marry a woman named Rosemary. Together, they raised 4 children. He spent much of his adult working life behind the wheel of a truck, driving the roads in and around Elmira as part of his daily routine. He knew the back roads, the wooded areas, the logging trails, and the remote stretches of hillside outside of town. He was also known to local police. The department had records on him involving past behavior with children that dated back years. Despite that history, the investigators who poured months into the 1964 case never came across his name. He was never interviewed, never fingerprinted, never considered. He lived another 40 years in the same city. He drove the same roads. He attended family gatherings. He went about his life without anyone ever connecting him to what had happened to Mary Teresa Simpson on that hillside in March of 1964. Alfred Raymond Murray, Jr. died on March 16, 2004, at the age of 73. His obituary ran in the local newspaper on March 19, 2004, the exact same date, 40 years later, that Mary Teresa's body had been found on Combs Hill Road. The obituary listed his wife, his surviving children, his grandchildren, and his military service. It described a man who had lived his whole life in one city, served his country, and raised a family. It did not mention Mary Teresa Simpson. The crime was entirely opportunistic. Murray had no personal connection to the Simpson family, no shared workplace, no mutual acquaintance, no prior relationship of any kind. He was a 32-year-old man with a vehicle, a history of predatory behavior, and an opportunity. He saw a 12-year-old girl walking alone on a March evening, and he took her.
On February 10, 2026, the Elmira Police Department, the Chemung County District Attorney's Office, and the FBI held a joint press conference. Elmira Police Chief Kristen Thorne stood at the podium alongside representatives from the FBI and the DA's office. "This is a historic day for the Elmira Police Department," Chief Thorne said. She confirmed that if Alfred Raymond Murray, Jr. were alive today, the District Attorney's Office would pursue criminal murder charges against him. Several of Mary Teresa's surviving family members were in the room. Linda was there. She was in her 70s now, a grandmother. She had spent 61 years carrying the weight of a night she had never been able to let go of. I am very happy it's finally ended. I just wish my mom was here." Chief Thorne turned to the family in the room. "I hope the family members here know this case was never forgotten. Mary Teresa was never forgotten." From the night she disappeared to the morning a name was finally spoken aloud in a government building in Elmira, New York, 61 years had passed. The full arc of forensic DNA science, from its earliest applications in criminal cases to genome sequencing and genetic genealogy, had been required to reach the end. A 12-year-old girl hidden beneath rocks and branches on a wooded hillside, found by a man and his 2 sons on a Thursday morning in March of 1964. The man who put her there lived in the same city for 40 more years. He died without anyone ever asking him about it. It took 61 years to find his name. If cold case evidence helped bring this story to you, a subscription means we can keep covering cases like this one. Leave your thoughts on this case in the comments below.